Hello everyone, and welcome to my little honest review on D&D's Dark Alliance. Before we get started, I just wanted to point out that I won't be going over the lore of the game, only the gameplay itself. Now to start things off, I feel that a bit of context is in order since many people seem to be expecting some AAA masterpiece. Took Games, the company that developed Dark Alliance, had their first official game release back in 2016 with a top-down shooter called Livelock that is said to play similar to Diablo. Turns out the game did pretty well for itself and caught the attention of Wizards of the Coast, prompting them to begin a partnership on developing a D&D game back in 2017. Fast forward a couple of years to 2019, the small team of 12 was fully acquired by Wizards, as well as announcing Dark Alliance that same year. And now, having grown to a team of 60 people, Dark Alliance is now fully released to the public. Now, upon first impressions, I was in love with everything. I was already a fan of Salvatore's work and immediately jumped into using Drizzt. At first, it was a lot of fun, and I even kind of felt like I was playing something like Shadows of Mordor again. But then, as I noticed who the voice actors were, things just got even better getting to hear them as these characters. Crispin Freeman is voicing Drizzt, Andrew Morgado is voicing Brunor, Jamieson Price is voicing Wolfgar, and Holly Gauthier-Frankel is voicing Caddy Bree. I think they all sound wonderful and did fairly well with these roles. And of course, the two composers for the game are Francois Xavier Dupas and Mathieu Leveau from Vibe Avenue. They pretty much worked on everything audio related for the entire game, and I honestly think they did an amazing job. Now, sadly, after seeing the sea of hate online for this game, I had to remember why I was here and look at things with a little more of a critical eye. After going through the first 5 acts of the game, these are my thoughts on everything I experienced. First and foremost, this looks like it was only ever meant to be a multiplayer game. Between the gear and difficulty choices, anyone can manage a solo run through the game, and depending on how you play it, each act can be as quick or as long as you want based on 2 factors: the difficulty you choose when going into an act, and of course, whether you bother to search for every single last piece of loot scattered throughout the entire level. As I habitually went through the acts looking for all the loot that I could find, there was a moment where I felt like all this game actually is a loot simulator. Once I ditched the desire to find loot and just focused on the monsters, things got a lot more fun for me, but incidentally, a lot more quicker to complete. This is when I realized, more than being a multiplayer game, it felt tailored to people who just like to grind dungeons and see how high they can reach. For example, if you're someone that loves to spam mythic dungeons in World of Warcraft, you might find enjoyment playing Dark Alliance with a group. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of each character. Drizzt performs pretty much how you'd expect, and is actually my favorite combat style of the 4 characters. Although I'm personally not a fan of the parry system, it seems like you're going to want to master it if you're going to be pushing harder difficulties. Primarily because the dodge system is quite infuriating to use. Most other games out there that utilize some sort of dodge system usually gives you the freedom to roll in any direction within 360 degrees. With Dark Alliance though, you're locked in 4 specific directions at 90-degree angles. If you're good at parrying, this won't be much of an issue for you, but if you're like me and rely on dodging too much, then you're going to have a problem. Other than that, everyone's favorite drow is a blast to play and even voices the descriptions for each act as you're selecting them on the level selection table.
The united peoples of Icewind Dale had defeated Kessel's armies and destroyed his crystal tower. But the dwarven warriors of Clan Battlehammer returned home to find their halls overrun, their people fleeing the valley. We rushed to their aid, fighting our way through the goblins in Verbeeg to find the goblin commander and put an end to this siege.
Next up is Caddy Bree. She's the only ranged character of the group and, if done correctly, can pump out a good bit of damage. She even comes with support spells, which is pretty nice to see when compared to what the other 3 characters have. I have to say though, as far as bow and arrow gameplay goes, hers is pretty lackluster to me. In games like Horizon or even Ghosts of Tsushima, where bows are an option and not a requirement, those systems were done in a way that I wanted to use them, and they felt like each action actually had weight behind it. Actually, I thought Ghost of Tsushima did it so well that I went through nearly the entire game only using it. With Cadibri though, I'm just not feeling anything. Sure, you can rapid fire or do a full draw on your bow for what seems like quadruple damage, but there's no downside to anything and feels extremely limited. There's also no incentive to do a full draw on your bow. You can just stand at max range spamming light attacks at your enemies. There's no substantial drawback to the damage or even projectile weight when doing this. The one true issue when doing this though is the flash animation that plays after each arrow is released. There is honestly no reason to have this in the game, and it just made everything harder to look at. One unique problem she does have that I haven't seen with others is when firing arrows. With a controller, you have to hold down the left trigger to initiate it and right bumper or trigger to fire. The issue Cadibri has is when firing arrows, sometimes the game thinks you're letting go of the left trigger and makes you do your melee hit while standing still, despite you actually still holding down that left trigger. And it takes a couple of tries to reinitiate the bow whenever this happens. Considering you can't cancel animations in this game, this can be problematic if someone is rushing you while this happens. Aside from that, there's just the occasional issue with spell placement. And now for Wulfgar and Brunor. I honestly can't find much wrong with these two. Dodge mechanic issues aside, their kits perform pretty well. Wulfgar is a really fun brawler that actually feels like he has weight behind his attacks and has a bunch of different ways to hurt people and knock them over. While Brunor is of course a really sturdy tank with ways to defend his teammates and provide support. Between the two of them, the game can be pretty unforgiving if you get stuck in a chain of crowd control abilities from the enemy monsters. Especially Wulfgar, since his attack animation seems to take a little longer than everyone else's does. Meanwhile, Brunor seems to have slightly overpowered abilities in his loadout. I'm sure it makes more sense when hitting the higher difficulties, but when you can just walk up to a group of goblins, drop your anvil, then walk away, things just become a little less fun for a moment. Oh, and one more thing. Brunor throwing a shield as his one ranged attack doesn't bounce off targets. I don't want it necessarily to have to auto-seek other enemies, but still, it's a missed opportunity that could have been pretty fun. Outside our 4 heroes, the only other issues I've come across is the occasional cooldown timer for our 2 abilities not displaying accurately. AI pathing for the enemies needs some work. Aggro range can be a bit silly considering how far away we can shoot arrows with Cadibri. A strange target lock-on bug where you're just stuck staring at a wall and have to die or restart the game to get out of it. Attacks that are bigger than the visible animations. Weird sliding collision issues when attempting jump attacks onto other enemies. And of course, the only part of the game that I actually hate, the in-game scorecards. I think it's neat that it's here, I really do. But realistically, they need to let us use an optional skip button here. Especially since it looks like most players will be repeating these levels back to back. And that's it. Those are my thoughts after playing the first 5 acts of the game. It honestly feels like it's a multiplayer plug-in for a different game entirely. Kinda like how Dragon Age Inquisition had a pretty meaty multiplayer on its own, but still retained a big story mode for the actual game. All in all, I actually had fun with it, and if you have the Xbox Game Pass, you should definitely give it a try yourself. Took Games has already acknowledged that they're looking at all of the feedback that people are talking about and are working on fixing the game, and supposedly will be having more content for it at some point in the future. Until next time, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Stay safe out there.